Well, I work with Global Partners and Associates in London, which is a social purpose company working on governance, human rights and democracy issues. And for the past 3 years, I've been working with the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Rights and Principles here at the IGF. And so the Dynamic Coalition is a space for multi-stakeholder working on human rights issues and where they intersect with internet governance. So we have representatives from the government sector, from the business sector, and also from the civil society sector. And we are working together to try and build an internet that supports human rights and that has the mechanisms and tools in place to prevent human rights violations online. So yesterday I organised a workshop on behalf of my own company, but also the Dynamic Coalition, to bring together different stakeholders who are implementing practical initiatives to uphold human rights online. So we had a representative from the Global Network Initiative, we had Rebecca McKinnon from civil society, and we also had Abele Okabe-Harris from Yahoo. And they spoke us through how their initiative is defining principles that can help companies who are working in environments where human rights standards aren't upheld, how that they can navigate around some of these issues in those environments. We also had representatives from the Council of Europe, from the Association for Progressive Communications, and all of these stakeholders are defining practical initiatives that actually address practical, concrete issues in the day-to-day lives of different stakeholders. A big tension that has arisen here at the Internet Governance Forum in terms of how do we also allow different cultures to behave in ways that they see appropriate. How do we allow states to implement policies that they see appropriate on a medium such as the internet, which is transboundary and which really spans across boundaries. And so I think that's where the Universal Human Rights Framework is really useful as a policy tool and as a guiding framework, because it's the only internationally accepted framework of standards that support humanity and that define what it really does mean to be human and how we can protect those fundamental values. So the Human Rights Framework is really an excellent framework for guiding around these issues on a transboundary medium such as the internet. At the same time, we need to reconcile those universal principles and values that are contained in the framework with specific situations that happen, the different stakeholders, the dilemmas that the different stakeholders have. For example, some of the internet service providers are their primary goal is obviously to make a profit, but also to provide access to information and knowledge for different groups across the world. How do they address dilemmas that they face when they are asked to behave in ways that don't uphold human rights, etc. So we need to find those kind of practical initiatives that allow these bodies to guide themselves around these different dilemmas, these different issues. And so whilst the Human Rights Framework is a very practical tool and an amazing framework of standards, we also need to define principles and practical policy principles that actually interpret and apply that human rights framework to these kinds of concrete issues. Sure. I was actually in a very interesting workshop at the IGF which was addressing some of these issues. But I think that we need to remember that the International Human Rights Framework actually contains guidelines that help us navigate around some of these issues already. So the security of a person is also a fundamental right, and the Universal Framework of Human Rights recognises this. So it also says that the security of a person, the right to life, etc., must be protected. And so some rights, such as freedom of expression and privacy, can be limited to protect the security of those people. But it can only be done in certain ways. So it only can be done in ways that are extremely specific and address only that issue that is concerned. And any restriction on freedom of expression and privacy must be defined in law, must be defined as necessary in a democratic society. So the framework does contain provisions for limitations on rights to protect security and protect us against crime, but it contains very specific provisions where that is necessary and where that is allowed. And the problem that has tend to arise in the internet environment is that these guidelines haven't been followed. And for example, sites are restricted, censorship policies are enacted that are blanket measures that don't address specific issues, that prevent access to a whole range of internet sites rather than the specific sites that it is defined in law that are illegal, for example. So we really need to ensure that any policies that are trying to address these issues are in line with the human rights framework, limit our fundamental rights to the smallest extent possible, and also really expand the public interest dimensions of the internet, the ability of the internet to support our positive rights, and not to prioritise some of the negative issues such as security to the detriment of some of the fundamental rights that we have. That's a very good question. As I said at the beginning, we're working with the Internet and Rights and Principles Dynamic Coalition, and there's also a dynamic coalition for freedom of expression online. And these are active spaces which work in between the annual Internet Governance Forums to continue the discussions, to continue to share experiences between these different practical initiatives that are happening, and also to enact practical initiatives themselves. For example, the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition is working with the Association for Progressive Communications to redraft their charter for human rights and principles on the internet. This is a practical initiative that's bringing different stakeholders together to really apply human rights offline to some of the online situations, dilemmas, and scenarios that we have. So these kinds of initiatives are ongoing throughout the year. People can go to the internetrightsandprinciples.org website and sign up to the dynamic coalitions. People can participate in these coalitions, whether they come to the annual IGFs or not. We encourage widespread participation from countries from across the world and from stakeholders working on different issues. You can sign up to a mailing list there and participate in discussions, and people can initiate their own activities, and we can coordinate the activities that are already going on. And if we all actively participate in these dynamic coalitions, then we can really start to expand these spaces for people who are interested in upholding our fundamental human rights online and building that internet space that supports our rights and freedoms.